Hello guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. From this video, I will discuss about the development of the face. Development of the face starts at the end of the fourth week. First, I will use this diagram to explain the first phase of the development of the face. So, I will explain the parts of this diagram. Here you can see in the diagram A, you can see a lateral view, and here B you can see anterior posterior view. So in the A picture you can see there are lens placodes and otic placodes, and there are pharyngeal arches bulging for the heart and here for the umbilical cord. Then in the next picture you can see this area is the frontonasal prominence. Frontonasal prominence. So in the frontonasal prominence, there are two depressions called as nasal placode. Here you can see whitish color area is the stomodeum. Stomodeum means it is a depression which later forms mouth and the oral cavity. Either side of the stomodeum you can see maxillary prominences are there, and caudal to this stomodeum you can see the mandibular arch here. This is the mandibular arch, and then you can see pharyngeal arches, second and third pharyngeal arches here. Here the bulging for the heart. Those are the important parts. At the end of the fourth week, what happens is facial prominences consisting primarily of neural crest derived mesenchyme. They forms mainly the first pair of the pharyngeal arches, and then maxillary prominences distinguish lateral to the stomodeum, and the mandibular prominences distinguish caudal to this stomodeum. Now you know what is stomodeum, where are the maxillary prominences and mandibular prominences. Next, frontonasal prominence is there, and the frontonasal prominence here, this is the frontonasal prominence, and it is formed by proliferation of mesenchyme ventral to the brain vesicles constitute the upper border of the stomodeum. As I showed you previously, there are local thickenings on the surface of this frontonasal prominence. They are nasal placodes. Then, during the fifth week, nasal placodes invaginate to form nasal pits. So, these are the nasal pits, which is formed by the invagination of the nasal placodes. After that, they create a ridge of tissues that surrounds the each pit and forms nasal prominences. Here you can see in this diagram the yellowish parts are the medial nasal prominences, and the bluish part is the lateral nasal prominence. Medial nasal prominence and lateral nasal prominence. Again, I will tell you, first there were some local thickenings on the surface ectoderm of the frontonasal prominence, and they are known as nasal placodes. Next, what happens is those placodes invaginate to form nasal pits. Then, on either side of these nasal pits, there are nasal prominences. Those are medial nasal prominence and lateral nasal prominence for the each nasal pit. The prominence on the outer edge of the pit are lateral nasal prominence, and on the inner edge are medial nasal prominence. Now you know about the nasal prominences as well. Then during the following 2 weeks, maxillary prominences continue to increase in size, and simultaneously they grow medially. These maxillary prominences are there, they increase in size gradually, and also they grow medially, compressing the medial nasal prominences towards the midline. Next, what happens is the cleft between the medial nasal prominence and the maxillary prominence is left. They are lost. The cleft between the medial nasal prominence and the maxillary prominence is lost here. The cleft between the medial nasal prominence and the maxillary prominence is lost, and the two fuse together. Those two fuse together as here. The upper lip, here upper lip is formed by the two medial nasal prominences and the two maxillary prominences. Lateral nasal prominences do not participate in formation of the upper lip. You can see very clearly. The lower lip and the jaw forms from the mandibular prominences which fuse together in the midline. Initially, the maxillary and lateral nasal prominences were here. Maxillary prominence and the lateral nasal prominence. In between the maxillary prominence and the lateral nasal prominence, there is a deep furrow, which is called as the nasolacrimal groove, and the ectoderm in the floor of this groove forms solid epithelial cord that detach from the overlying ectoderm. After canalization of the cord, forms the nasolacrimal duct. Its upper end widens to form the lacrimal sac. Following the detachment of the cord, the maxillary and lateral nasal prominences merge with each other. In this diagram, you can see the so-called nasolacrimal duct here, and the upper end has expanded to form the nasolacrimal sac. This nasolacrimal duct then runs from the medial corner of the eye, as you can see here, to the inferior meatus of the nasal cavity, and maxillary prominences enlarge to form the cheeks of the cheeks and the maxillae. So, as a summary, the structures contributing to formation of the face are from the frontonasal prominence here. It forms the forehead, bridge of the nose, and the medial and lateral nasal prominences. From the maxillary prominences, it forms the cheek and the lateral portion of the upper lip. And medial nasal prominence forms the philtrum of the upper lip, crest, and the tip of the nose. Lateral nasal prominence forms the alley of the nose, and the mandibular prominence forms the lower lip of the face. Finally, you have to remember that the nose is formed by 5 facial prominences. Those are, first one is the frontonasal prominence that gives rise to the bridge of the nose. The merged medial nasal prominence provide the crest and the tip. Then the lateral nasal prominences forms the either sides or the alley of the nose. Frontonasal prominence and 2 medial nasal prominences and 2 lateral nasal prominences. Those are the 5 facial prominences which contributes to forms the nose. So that's all about the development of the face. Thank you for watching. From my next video, I will teach about the formation of the palate.